Well, I want to thank Christine Tully for joining us this afternoon to talk about writing and publishing post-tenure. Take it away, Christine.
All right. Hi, everybody. I've worked with your university before on lots of different scholarly writing endeavors, but today what we're going to do is talk about that post-tenure career. What does that look like when you're mid-career? And this also would apply to even senior scholars. So if you're post-tenure and it's been a long time since tenure, these strategies will still apply here, and all of the content that we do comes from a lot of the research that I do in faculty writing and productivity, as well as our work with Defend, Publish, and Lead. Most people watching these are probably familiar with us, but if you're not, we are a writing organization staffed by PhDs in writing studies, and our emphasis is on movement and completion, where the idea is to get you moving on writing and to figure out what it takes to get projects out the door. So that's the little spiel. I want to start with a principle with post tenure and mid career that I bump into when I work with faculty that fall into this group. But if you've been working in this career for a while, so right now I can't remember where I am if I'm in 24 or 25 years in, but it's not too late to start again on a new project, a new research agenda. You could totally change your mind. You could move in another direction. And I'm saying that because sometimes mid-career faculty or post-tenure faculty tend to be very invested in all the things that they've built. So they're still going to the same conference they went to 20 years ago, but you might have outgrown that conference. They're still publishing in the same area. It's starting to feel maybe a little bit stale, where maybe you want to do something a little bit different. So mid-career is not too late to start. There are plenty of people that shift gears. I did. And in fact, like more of my own publishing and scholarship really took off in the post-tenure period for a lot of reasons. But one, because I was at a very teaching intensive institution. And, at that point, I just wanted to work on what I needed to work on to get tenure. And at my institution, it was peer-reviewed activities like scholarly articles, conference presentations, and all that. So post tenure, I started working on books, but that's because they didn't count. I mean, they counted in tenure, but a book counted the same as a scholarly article. So it wasn't in my best interest time-wise to do that. And I'm saying all that just to say that, one of the great things about this is just to think about with new energy. It's just not too late to get going on something new. And we're going to look at how you might want to do that and get writing again. So I want to point out a couple of things that amp up. So you'll notice there's an arrow on here, and somehow I just lost my cursor. There's an arrow that shows that a bunch of stuff is moving in one direction. But what tends to happen post tenure or mid career is that there's increased administrative load. It might have gotten you before tenure, but for some people, they protect junior faculty or newer faculty and they say, okay, well, until you have tenure, you don't have to worry about being the department chair or taking your turn as like the writing program administrator or something like that. But that tends to find you once you have tenure. Also, there's increased opportunities where other people find you for, let's say, good opportunities. So you've been around for a little while, so it's more likely that someone might invite you to do a chapter in an edited collection, or you might see the same people at conferences, and that generates maybe an opportunity to collaborate. Or there might be some positions even at your own institution, they're only available to tenured faculty or more likely to go to only tenured faculty. So there's just more there. But at the same time, for a lot of us, there tends to be increased family obligations, particularly because most people in this mid-career lane do tend to fall into that sandwich generation where you might still have you might still have some responsibilities at home for children, but then on the other end, you might have aging parents, elder care, all that kind of stuff, or just in general, you might have extended family or something like that that's just kind of pushing on those boundaries. So you may have a sweet spot in there for a little while where everything is going smoothly, but in general, all those things increase. And obviously, as we get older as scholars, our parents get older and so on. So, it's unlikely to stay the same. And so one of the things that we know about post-tenure and mid-career is that a lot of faculty do one of two things. They either sort of collapse and coast, or they take it in a new direction and they go somewhere else with their career. And we'll talk about what that means. But it really is affected by these three factors. So for some people, just burnout and all the other things that are contributing kind of slow you down. But that's why I said it's not too late to start. So one of the things I've been doing for another university is looking at associate professors. And they're very, very concerned because they only have, I forget what the percentage is, but it's very, very low. It's something like 2% of associate professors reach full rank at their institution. And when we start digging into these numbers a little bit, we figured out that it's not for they're getting, denied the full rank. It's that they're not applying in the first place because they're allowed to choose every year whether they apply or not. And they have to write a sentence if they're going to apply or not and why. And so we started analyzing some of that stuff. And most of these reasons, meaning like too much admin, too many family responsibilities, just they're burned out. There's a lot of reasons why they don't do it. And it was anonymous, so we felt like the answers were pretty accurate. So one of the things that I wanted to find out is just any kind of pressure points. So Nancy, I don't know if you have anything you want to jump in, and I know I can say a few things, but we could throw out just a couple.
Yeah, I think where we're feeling the pressure. One is the pressure to be an advocate for pre-tenure faculty. Another is to maintain kind of interest in the scholarship that I was doing pre-tenure. Is there more to say? Am I ready to move on to a new topic? And then, of course, all the committees.
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah.
like you're associate professor. I have four committees for you.
Yes, you're welcome. Yes, and that is where that has happened, and especially if you've been at your institution for a while, and I've stayed at my same institution my whole career. I didn't plan to, but that's just how it worked out. And for lots of reasons, I really like where I am. I could do a lot of things, but part of that is that the institution is growing, it's flexible. And one of the things is that it's not that pressure is necessarily a negative thing. It could be that there's a lot of opportunity. So, for example, as soon as I became, actually, not even as soon as maybe 2 years after becoming an associate professor, I had the opportunity to build a graduate program. And so that brought with it, the idea that, yes, I was allowed to build it, but, that came with all the curriculum development and all these other things. And what does this mean? And just, there were a lot of things to think about. So, yeah, it's a complex scenario for sure. One of the things I wanted to unpack were the lanes that most people go into post tenure if you're putting the gas on, like you're still going in your career. You haven't burned out, you haven't checked out, because we have plenty of associate professors, mid-career people that have just checked out. They teach their classes, they do what they got to do, and that's their choice. That's what they've decided to do. But assuming that you want to do something else beyond that, and I'm not to say this is not to say that you don't have years like that. We all have years like that where it's just a maintenance year where you're not doing a lot. We got, these careers are a long game. So there's nothing to say about that. But picking out like a lane post tenure, it's usually presented to us in three lanes and they sound like you can only do one at a time. But most careers post tenure don't really look like that. They might have different emphasis points at different areas. So one lane that we've heard about a lot is the leadership lane. You become the department chair or the dean or a director of something, or maybe you go all the way up and you go to become a vice president or potentially a president. Usually people selecting that role have some indicators prior to tenure that that's the interest. They tend to take leadership positions on committees and take leadership positions anytime something is offered to them, and that might be something that is a lane you might want to go in. And sometimes it's temporary. So, for example, some departments, my own included, our department chairs rotate off. We vote every 3 years, and you can do it one more time, so a total of 6 years. But then you're out. Somebody else has to do it. So they could be very time-oriented scenarios. Disciplinary leadership, totally other realm where you're looking more at how you can contribute to your field. So again, that might be you're the editor of the flagship journal, or you might be on a committee or a conference chair. A lot of these types of things are lanes that they don't come to you until you've been around in your discipline for a while. So they are sometimes hand in hand with publishing how they get there. But also, for example, I was at an institution that is, more teaching oriented, no, not a book campus. We just have, scholarly articles for tenure. And one of the things that I figured out right away is in disciplinary organizations, they always want people to be on committees. Just like at our universities where everybody wants new committee members, a lot of times there's committee members, and I was able to just email the organization as a tenure track person and say, hey, I need a committee to have some external service. Do you have anything where you need a person? And I got put on something and then ended up doing a lot of disciplinary leadership roles. So that, but you could stay in that lane. You could become, the person that's one of the faces of your discipline or the big names. And then the other route is going through your scholarship. So you're writing and publishing a lot, or you're becoming like the keynote speaker on your research, or sometimes like a panel respondent because you're so famous with all your scholarship that everybody wants you to come and do something. So these are kind of what they look like, but I don't want us to think of them as discrete lanes because they're really not. They can overlap, they can contribute to each other. For example, you could write about being a dean. That could be your area of scholarship, and those two things could happen. You could become a disciplinary leader or a journal editor because you've published so much in a journal that you're a good candidate for it. So I want to think about them as sort of like overlapping, but usually one of these is kind of like a preferred lane you want to go to, at least at a period in time. And so I want to show you my little post-tenure journey. Let me minimize our little faces so I can show the whole thing. Okay. So I made it. This is roughly these days that are on, or the years that are on here are like rough years. And I'm showing this just to show you that it goes up and down, but it also goes in phases about the things we just talked about. So I ended up getting tenure around 2007. I had my first child right at that point. She was born in 2006, but I had some maternity leave and all that. So 2007 approximately. But I was eligible to apply for a sabbatical, and I did that in 2008, which is here. Some other things that happened as soon as I was able to get to tenure, I knew I wanted to write a book. And so I did do it, but it's a failed book project. So, whole other story. Sometimes book projects just don't go. I didn't know what I didn't know. I've published lots of books since then. So, if anybody's worried about a failed book project, you can totally recover. I definitely did. I did a visiting scholar position somewhere just for a few weeks. And so that was kind of the first sabbatical. By the time I got to, a couple years later, baby number two comes around 2010. So if you're playing along with me, there are two children happening post tenure. I mean, technically, my daughter was born and I got my tenure letter on the same day, but like I didn't have kids when I was trying to do that, which may not be the case for you, depending on when you have them. So I was kind of lucky I waited, and that's just where they are in here because I want to make sure I talk about that as like a family thing. But one other thing, if you're doing the math, then that means baby number two is a 15-year-old. So I still have at home post tenure a kid that can't drive, right? So I'm still dealing with, some school things. She's a freshman in high school and so on. So I'm saying that just so you can kind of see like how some of these other things play out. Administration in 2011, I got appointed as the director of writing. I put it off for a long time. That is in the English department. That's the person that's directing all the first year writing courses across campus. Our department did a pretty good job of protecting pre-tenure faculty, but it was expected that everybody was taking a turn with that. So one of the things I do like about my department, not all departments are like this, is that not everybody wants to do it, but it does rotate, so you kind of know it's coming. But that also allowed me to just have some insight to what undergraduate programming looked like, and that's where I made some time with curriculum development. So I really started thinking about being more of like a university leader and thinking about developing, a graduate program where we could have teaching assistants. And because I was interested in graduate stuff, I went the university leadership route, became a graduate council chair, which is like our faculty senate equivalent at the graduate level. And I did all the publishing, all about administration. So I did all that. I jammed in another sabbatical that was just kind of on a teaching project between 2011 and 2017, finished my director term. And notice it's 2017, so number three on here. I started my actual dream project, which is something that I'm going to talk to you about today, where I actually worked on the project I'd been wanting to work on since, I don't know, like 2003, maybe a long time. So some of us, just because academia is such a long game, it might take you a really long time to get to that dream project, but the time might be now. So we're going to look at that. But that was around 2017. I started working on it. That was also a good space with children where and a supportive partner who's also an academic, so he's a dean. This is a spot where I was able to actually even go on a research trip in London for a month, which many of us cannot pull off, but just that kind of opportunity I was not doing as a new faculty member or even as a faculty member with tenure, like around 2007. Again, waited like 10 years to be able to do it. Since then, 2024, two books came out, same year, 2024, 2025. I've done a bunch of leadership roles. I bought my writing coaching company, which is why you're watching this webinar for. And I did another sabbatical in there in 2025 where I worked on another book. And then finally, like where I am right now at the end of this journey, which is not the end, because I figure I still have about 10 years left in this career where I'm still like actively working at an institution. But what had happened was I got invited to write a book by Princeton about sabbaticals. That's what I'm working on right now. So we mentioned those opportunities, those popped up. And I decided I'm going to get back into disciplinary leadership and for me, interdisciplinary leadership. And I have been elected the president of Textbook and Academic Authors Association. So right now I'm their vice president. I will be their president. And I'm saying all that to just show ups and downs in here. Sometimes there's writing, sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's a kid, sometimes there's not. Sometimes, well, I guess there always is, but sometimes there's a kid kind of getting into the journey, leadership, and so on. And so, our post-tenure journey, one thing that you could do if you're post-tenure is look at this from where you are in it. How long has it been since you've been in tenure, or since you've had received tenure? For some of us, it's been a really long time now, but for others of us, it was just last year or 2 years ago. So your journey might be a little bit shorter and it might be a little bit of an exploration. So when I describe this to other faculty members, I will often say in a lot of ways, I was very opportunist because that is the way that our university kind of operates. Like cool opportunities pop up, and then go ahead and grab them, which is one of the reasons I'm still there. I kind of like it that it's an innovative place where things happen all the time. But other things I had to actively work for. So, for example, like working on a dream project, my university, it was a book, by the way, and my university didn't, they still post tenure don't care so much about books. You just have to do more articles. A book can be fine. So it was one of those things where I really had to decide if I wanted to do it. So I'm saying that just to say there's no like external factor there. This was internally motivated. So kind of a big map. I'll see if Nancy wants to ask any questions about that, and then we're going to jump into strategies. But anything you want to ask about that, I can move the boxes again. Oops.
I don't think so. Nope. Go ahead and move into
All
strategy.
right.
Although
So,
I'm excited about you being president of TAA. So yeah.
yay. Yeah, I'm a big believer in that organization. So anybody that wants to chat with me about it, I love what they do. And if you're a faculty member and you have not heard of them, they are as far as I know, the only national organization strictly focused on faculty publication, where they really look at how academic authors experience writing, and they focus on both textbooks and academic stuff like books and articles and all that. So my discipline of writing studies does focus on that because that's what it is. It doesn't focus on it a lot at the faculty level, which has made a nice lane for me to do some
Mm.
research, but other disciplines do a much better job. If you're in nursing or if you're in something like that, there are many disciplines that do a great job with faculty writing and kind of thinking about it. But if not, Textbook and Academic Authors Association is a really great kind of low cost organization that just does a ton of training in that area. And actually, I'll
And
see.
we
Yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
I was going to say, and we have an institutional membership. So our faculty
Yes.
can be members. So just look for our newsletters and bulletins
Oh,
for
yes,
how to
definitely
do
grab
that.
that. There's so many templates, free webinars. I find something new in there every day. And just now being on the inside on their executive board, one thing that I really appreciate it is that they know that academic writing is not stagnant and it doesn't look the same. They're always putting in new content, which is really helpful for what we're talking about today for like a post-tenure journey, because I think we all are aware that, for example, like AI is going to change what happens to some of our things post-tenure. But it's not even that. It could be that, for example, if we're working on scholarly books, there might be a scenario where you need to do more digital support, or you might need to think more about open access. So scholarly publishing is not the static, way it might have been 30, 40 years ago. So I feel like their other great thing is they're on top of it in a way that maybe your scholarly discipline might not be. So yes, plug for TAA. I love them. All right. So these are some questions that I'm going to set up and kind of show some strategies how to address them. So what we're doing now, we're going to 5 questions that really get you thinking about what is it that I want to do post tenure? And so some of these, if you're watching this video, you want to think about them and let them percolate a little bit. Also, we'll share a link a little bit later and actually show something on screen of kind of a tool where you can write some of this down. But for right now, this is a great chance to just sort of like watch and learn and figure out like, well, this is kind of what my answer is right now. And then you could look at some strategies about how to move forward with that answer. Um, so one of the things I think is really important is just to figure out right now where you are in your writing life. And so these are some responses that I got from a workshop I did, I don't know, maybe I think it was at the beginning of the year. And these are some of the responses. So one just says, I'm writing regularly, working on something now. Another person said, it's been a while since I wrote. I don't know how long a while was. Another one said, I'm writing, not finding time for it regularly. So my guess is that person's kind of starting and stopping. I've stopped writing since tenure submission. Very accurate. A lot of post-tenure faculty do. Some people just said they need a new spark. So what you want to figure out is how are you feeling about scholarly writing right now? So for some people post-tenure, you're still going. You're still working on things like maybe you're still in your area of research and you can keep publishing in there. Sometimes you're lucky enough that people keep throwing you invites. So I had a good 2 year stint where people are like, want to do this edited collection chapter with me? And do you want to collaborate on this other thing where I didn't have to think about what I was going to write next because people kept feeding me projects, which is kind of a nice space to be in until you realize that you're not really excited by that research. And then that's another thing that happens to post-tenure faculty is it sort of is the, two sides of the same coin where, sometimes you're like, oh, pre-tenure I was really desperate to try to get a lot of publications, but now I've got a lot of opportunity, but I maybe don't want to do some of these. So there's that. Thinking too about writing and not finding time for it regularly out of all these scenarios, this is the most typical one that I find with post-tenure faculty when I work with them because most of them are still working on some scholarship that it could be like, one article a year or something like that. But writing is not built into their schedules. It's not a thing that they do regularly. Weeks could go by, months could go by. You only worry about writing, maybe in the summer or on a break. That lines up with, it's been a while since I wrote. But if you look at people that are kind of making writing a center of their life and they want to do it either in conjunction with like disciplinary or university leadership, then it has to be something that shows up in your week. And that's one of the things that is it's something you sort of knew as a tenure faculty member, but now it's kind of a reality. So one thing that I know from doing my dream project is interviewing with a lot of prolific authors and just like what are their habits like? How are they still putting out books and articles? How are they doing all these other interesting things? And their lives seem really full and they're editing journals and doing all this travel and then they're publishing and how does that all happen? And something that held true, and this was with 15 faculty member that I really studied their writing habits. What held true is all of them made some space for writing. It was a thing they did in their week. Now, it was not a thing they did every day. Many of these faculty members would say, like, let's say touch or have contact with a writing project a couple times a week. There were some that only wrote once a week. So one of the people that I interviewed, they wrote Sunday afternoons, and that's it because they had very heavy admin and meetings. But it was every Sunday afternoon. They really, kind of committed to it. It was a regular thing. And so this is no judgment at all. It's just where are you in your writing life? If you cannot remember the last time that you were actually writing something, one of the things you can do, and I've had faculty do this, I actually did this at a workshop for senior scholars, and they all giggled because I had them look at their CVs. And I said, go and find the most recent publication you did and yell out a year. And so people were like, people would yell out, oh, 2024, because this was just, a year or two ago. But then I had somebody yell out something like 2006. Everybody, of course, laughs and that kind of stuff. But I'm like, that's fine, because the other thing about having everybody just kind of shout out a number and it was in a big crowd, one of the things that was really interesting is that years were all over the place and very few people had something within the last 3 years. So it could be that you are writing, but it's just slower and you've slowed down. Like you're still working on things, but you've decided you don't want to work at a breakneck pace to get something done. That's fine. That is your option, depending on what you're looking for. All right, so let's look at some strategies just for this one, and then we're going to do the other four. So, oops, sorry. These two are related. Sorry, I forgot about that. I'm going to show you two and then a strategy. So here's their second question. The one is like, what's your writing life now? But the second one is, what role do you actually want writing to play in your writing life? Because you may be watching this because you know you want to get some writing done. Like it sounds nice, you'd love to do it, you have a project you want to work on, but it's worth an honest question. Do you want to get more writing out of what's happening right now? Do you want to scale back? Or do you want just something different happening? And sometimes these things are all happening together. So if you have been writing regularly and pumping out, say 2 articles a year for the last 10 years, you might decide, I want to do a totally different project on my timeline. I don't want to be on that, the hamster wheel of doing that. But other people will say, I really want to do something bigger. I really want to lean more into writing. Because the one thing that we know about post tenure, for a while you have this sort of nice middle period where you're mid-career, things are fine, you're not new anymore, but you're not a senior person anymore. But as we know, we all get older and time eventually will run out on us. Like we're eventually going to retire. This is something I started thinking about, which is kind of funny. I think, like I said, I have about 10 years left, and I realized, it takes me a couple, 2 years, year and a half to do a book when I'm working fast. And I realized I'm like, that means I can only do so many more books. 8 more books or 6 more books or something. And I was like, well, I don't want to waste a book on something I don't want to do. So that's another thing to think about. So and sometimes it freaks people out where they're like, oh, well, I only have 12 years. And if you look at the way that you've been writing before this, maybe you might even look at the span of time in your best writing years. How fast did you get some work out? So you have to think, will this be the case? Will I be able to do it? Do I have a sabbatical coming up? Do I have, some time to do it? So, just even thinking about what you want that to look like, I will meet with some faculty that will say, I do want to write more, but I don't want to do it the way I did it pre-tenure. I would really like to just have some regular writing time where it's just very systematized, it's rhythmic, it just happens. It's nice. I don't have to worry about like a panic. I'm just working on my things. Like there's not a big pressure, and that's fine. But you'll have to figure out, what you want that to look like. So here's some ways to do that. So here's a strategy that kind of works with both of them. I think one of the best ways you can do this, especially if you've been out of writing for a long time, is instead of diving right in and saying, I'm writing today, and like sitting down at 1 o'clock and then just staring at your laptop because you don't know what you're doing. I think a better strategy is to get writing on your radar again. And if you're already writing, this is another kind of generative activity to get you thinking about some new ways to do it. So there's lots of ways that you can do this, but I tend to recommend getting yourself some writing content. So this could be a fun thing that you work in when you feel like you should be working, but you really don't want to work. You could work and do this because this is totally worth it. So one of the things that you can do is just attend any kind of like a free webinar on writing. The Textbook and Academic Authors Association has some that you will get as your part of your membership, but we also run free webinars all the time, and we are running one on summer writing. So I will put a link out there. I'll make sure it gets out to everybody. But that's one that you can just go one time and figure out, what am I doing about writing this summer? So that's one way to do it. But things more regularly that you could do would be looking at a book on academic writing. I just did an interview for our podcast, Defend, Publish, and Lead, which is another thing I'm going to recommend. But one of the things that I did in my last podcast episode was interview Dr. Pat Goodson. She's put out a bunch of books on scholarly writing productivity. And my favorite book by her is 90 Days, 90 Ways, because what it does is it literally is set up where you have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and she gives you something to do. I love it. It's brilliant. I wish I would have thought of it. It's such a great idea. And this is not to say that you have to write every single day. You don't. So you ignore Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. If you want, just Monday is the first day when you open the book. Say you don't write till Thursday, Tuesday becomes your Thursday. Doesn't matter. But it's great because what she does is she gives you generative ideas about writing. She gives you some editing advice on some days. It's just a small thing that you could do every day. And for people that really have trouble writing, I love it as a way to just get moving again without worrying so much about what project am I doing? Or I have this half-finished project I haven't touched in 3 years. What am I doing with it? I like that book for an entry point. It's pretty low cost. So I'll put a link in there in all my follow-up. But I love books on writing. She's got a good one. I also like podcasts about academic writing. There's not many of us. So I run our weekly podcast for Defend, Publish, and Lead. I started it 4 years ago, which is crazy. I've only missed 2 weeks where we had to repeat episodes because I really like this stuff. Like I really like just a small tip, throw it out in your week and see if it works. So that's what the podcast for us does, where it will reinforce a lot of the things that we're talking about here. But there are a few other ones just about how you can get work completed. Some of them are more like pitches for academic programs and stuff like that. So you got to stay away from a few of them. They'll be fine. There'll be some that you can find, but in general, if you look, you can also look at. There's a podcast called On the New Books Network that talks about new academic books. And even if you could care less about what the content of that book is about, the host, Christina Gensler, always talks about how the book got written, where they got the idea. They're hour-long episodes. So if you like a good deep dive podcast, I like it because it really does figure out like how does some of our scholarship get produced, and it does cross disciplines. So I think it's great for that. So anything like that to get writing back on your radar is a good way just to think about writing, because the reason we're doing this, because you might be wondering, how does that have anything to do with getting me to write more? It does in one way, and it just allows you to determine your level of interest. And I think you need to determine that level to know what you want to do moving forward. So sometimes you can listen or read a book or something, and it will spark something like, oh, I'm going to try that. Or you might figure out from some of these things that, oh, that's not the kind of work I want to do, which at least eliminates something. Because the other thing post tenure, which is kind of great, is that you can do anything you want in a lot of cases. So it's very difficult to make a choice. So I know I just said my career probably got 10 more years, maybe 12, we'll see. But it's not forever. So I do have to make some choices about what I want to do. And I like this strategy just to really start thinking about like, what role do I want writing to play in my life? And all of these resources, I think, are ways to just kind of think about that a little bit, specifically in the summer, too, which would be the next season we're getting in. Summer is sometimes a time where people really take stock of what am I doing about all this stuff? All right, so that's a strategy for that one. One that I also like is figuring out what does your schedule look like now? So there's lots of things that could be pressuring your schedule. As many of us are administrators, whether we want to be or not, we are. So lots of meetings. Our institutions are now giant cultures of assessment where there's all kinds of reports. Students need a lot more. There's a lot of student communication that maybe used to happen in the classroom, but now there's tons of emails or, digital communication. There's all that kind of stuff. I know at my institution, we have a lot more required trainings for things like Title IX and all that. All those things hit in the schedule. And one thing that I've noticed is that most academic schedules now are really, really fragmented, meaning you might have a meeting from 9 to 10:30, and then you've got a weird 15-minute period, and then you've got another block for 45 minutes, and then another, 1 hour period. And it used to be that maybe we were just worrying about scheduling our classes and then maybe a stray committee meeting once a week. But the reality is, most of us are sucked up into some kind of meeting more than once a week. And so, what we want to do, and this is a good exercise, is just to look at your calendar. If you have a digital calendar or a paper planner, just kind of scroll back through it and just look at how crowded it is. One tell for me is if I see a bunch of boxes kind of stacked on top of each other in a digital calendar. I do color code. And if I just see that things are really, really tight in there, there's not even like a little tiny window of white, it means it's pretty tight. So it could mean too, as part of your kind of look at where writing is going to fit, it could mean that something else has to go. And it could mean that maybe you're going to step off that committee that you've been on for 10 years, but and you like it, but you don't love it, or you're tired of it, or it's time to have, some new faculty take that role. So figuring out those things I think is really important. Another thing to think about with this one, oops, sorry, I just keep moving all the faces. I would think about if you're going to be recommitted to your writing, and this is why we're kind of thinking about the calendar, what's your interest, what kind of role you want writing to play, is I would try to think about When am I going to start my new life? So if you've been watching this video and you're thinking about, okay, I really want to do something about writing post tenure. Either I want to amp mine up, I want to refine it a little bit. I like to pick a starting date. It's kind of like a New Year's resolution and just say, okay, is it the first date of summer? So for us, I think our summer semester, or yeah, our summer, like I guess our summer term starts May 11th. I thought was the day that I found. So if that's the case, I might say, all right, my summer writing is starting May 11th. Okay, so I know that's when I got to get busy on some writing. But then I also need to think about, all right, well, what does that look like? And one thing that is big in my scholarship is I think about semesters are all different. So some semesters have a ton of work in them, some don't. Sometimes summer is big, sometimes it's not. But what I do know is you can't make a yearly plan. You really got to go by the semester and what it's entailing. So you might think about just for the summer, how many hours do you want to do? Make it your writing range. And I always try to say, okay, I'm going to work 3 to 6 hours a week, or 4 to 8, or 8 to 10, or whatever it is. And the low end number is a number before I exit the week is a must do. And so I always make sure I have at least, if I was going to do 3 to 6 hours, I make sure I had 3 hours blocked on the calendar plus a backup slot because we all know that writing time can be taken. There is also the opportunity, if we think about a Tuesday Toolbox, which I think your institution has access to, and I will make sure that this particular link is in there. Yep. Okay, so here's a way that you can use those. If you've been looking at Tuesday Toolbox and you're like, I don't know what that is, and not watching it, one of the very first lesson one is write today, and I really sincerely mean it. So, like one of the things that you can do with these videos, if you haven't watched them, this would also be a really great way to get your writing going, but they're short. They're usually less than 10 minutes. And this one actually walks you through writing. You watch the video and then you start writing. So one of the things that's really hard, especially being post tenure, where you know the writing game, you've been around long enough. But if it's been a while, it's been a year, it's been 3 years, it's been, a whole semester. It's really hard to start. It's still really hard to start. So the whole point of that video is to have you watch something and then get going. It actually guides you through getting started, and then taking that first step is really helpful, I think, because that way you don't have to worry so much that, oh, I'm going to sit down and I won't know what to do. That video does give some help, and again, I'll give a link to it. But other things to think about it, if we're doing a starting date, we're doing that on purpose, because one of the things that faculty struggle with every day is, well, I'm going to try to get some writing done, but the schedule's so busy, no writing ever happens. And for some people, they don't want it to. They want, and that's okay. Like some people don't love writing. That is okay. So, they don't want it to. So they let the schedule get crowded. Or you were walking across campus and then you bumped into somebody and you're like, if I chat for 20 more minutes and drink coffee, I don't have to go to my writing because whoops, there won't be any time. Like, yes, like we know all the tricks. We all do it. I do it sometimes. And I do like to write, but there are many times where I'm like, that would be so great not to sit in the library today. I just don't feel like it. So I've totally been there. But the thing I like about a start date is it eliminates all the worry and the struggle before you get to the start date, where it's not the guessing game of, am I doing it today? Am I not doing it today? That day you're doing it. And then you can use the video if you want to kind of kick you off. But there's plenty of other things that you can do, like blocking writing time, making sure that it has a priority. You said you want it to be a priority, and this is why we're trying to identify like how much of our priority do you want it to be? So here's an example. I'm finishing a book. I'm right in the throes of getting the final chapter finished. I have a deadline. My editor's talking to me. Like it's all kind of exploding on me, and I've worked very, very hard for the last 4 weeks where I've been writing all the time, like all the time. So I know for me, I purposely made my summer start date in June rather than in May. That's very unusual for me. I always talk about how May is such a sweet spot for getting writing done. And for those of you that are academic parents, I would definitely encourage you to write a lot in May because a lot of times your semester is over or winding down and you can get some work done before your kids come home out of school. So May is a sweet spot. So this is like the first May I won't really lean in hard on writing because I'm coming off of this really big project. And I know for me, I need to do the activities that we're talking about here today. Like I really need to think about like what's my next project because for the last I don't know, 12 years, I've sort of known. They've either been projects that I've agreed to do because they're obligation, there were ones I wanted to do, And this one, the book that I'm working on right now, is all about sabbaticals. It was an invited project, so I wasn't planning to write this book. I had no intention. Somebody came to me. It was a great opportunity, but I wasn't planning to do this because the book I want to do is on writing project management. So that's my next one that's coming. At some point. But for me, like I just started thinking about this, like, and this might be true for you too. If you're coming off of a big project, a really heavy administrative load, it's okay to make that start date not tomorrow. It could be, May 20th or whatever. So, I would just think about May. If you need to use those days before children come home, use them because you don't get them back. And it's much harder in those later summer months for academic parents. But for others, if you need kind of that break between a really hectic semester and then some nice slower summer energy, that's fine. So these are all things to kind of consider as you're thinking about how you want to get going. Because what we're looking at here for a strategy is when are you getting started and then how are you going to execute it? So just in terms of time, where is it going? Dream projects. Well, I saved it for number four, but I really want to point this out because one of the best ways to get either back into writing or to rejuvenate your writing is to finally work on the thing you've been wanting to work on forever. And I mentioned my dream project. I didn't start working on it till around 2017. And that was a book on how it's called How Writing Faculty Write. And it was interviews with productive faculty about how they wrote projects. So yes, I realize I kind of present on this stuff, but that was the thing I really wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something with faculty writing. I'd been wanting to do it for so long, but I knew I did not have the bandwidth or the type of semester to pull it off. So I was able to then, interview my faculty. It's modeled off of the Writers at Work series from the Paris Review because I had been reading those interviews for like decades. So one thing I might think about is like, what's something that you've really been dreaming about? It could be a big problem that you see in your classroom. You're like, wow, if I ever had a chance to do X, Y, Z, I would totally do it. So I just heard somebody in a workshop the other day, they were talking about something with clinical faculty and this is a faculty development person, but she just said something like, if I ever had a chance to write a guide for clinical faculty transitioning into teaching, I would totally do it. And I was like, well, why don't you do it? And we kind of talked about it. So you might have a project like that. You might want to write your own textbook because you hate the one that you've been using in your accounting classroom for, 20 years. You want to make your own. So another podcast episode I did 2 weeks ago was with two textbook authors that talked about that. That's how they got into it, where they just told a publisher everything they hated about a textbook. And then they got the opportunity to make one that they liked better. So I would think through what a dream project looks like for you. For me, I knew it was going to be a book. I knew I wanted a book length project. I knew I kind of wanted like the writing studies version of the Paris Review, which is what I got. That's what I did. But you might want something else. So Dr. Lillian Mina, who's one of our writing coaches at Defend, Publish, and Lead, she wanted to do a Substack newsletter. So some people really like to do more like public scholarship and kind of more free form. And so, yeah, so she basically writes a Substack for senior professors. So I will put that in, I will put the link in there because it's great. She's got so many great insights. She's done a ton of administration. She's been the president of the Council of Writing Program Administrators. She's got a heavy responsibility to her institution. She did tons of teaching. She's published a lot. She just did, she just had a good scholarship run with a bunch of publications. So, you might decide you wanted to do something like that. So I would think about the dream project and think about impact because it could be you want to publish something that makes a difference in the world or it could just be a project that you just can't let go. So in my case, I didn't think about impact when I wrote it because I didn't care. I was so excited. I was just like, if I can find any publisher to publish this, I'm doing it. Like enough that I cared enough about it that I was willing to even self-publish it if I had to get to that point. I didn't have to get to that point. It's with Utah State University Press. But that's something else to think about. Like, is it something that you want to be like a legacy project or, something that has an impact or a practical impact on the world? These are all things that you might consider, right? You could also think about what will energize your writing now. So this is a strategy. I mentioned dream projects, but you don't have to call them like big dream projects like your life's work or your legacy project. That one probably will be mine because of just of the way it's kind of shaped my career. But Other ideas would be projects you care about or project about your teaching. So if you're really kind of bored with your old research agenda, maybe you're going to study something in a classroom. We talked about solving a problem. It's also okay to work on a project that maybe you don't care so much about the project, but you want to get mentored by that person because they're a really great writer, or it would just be fun to have some intellectual engagement. Maybe you need accountability, so you need to do some kind of a co-writing project. And it's also okay to do a project that you just do once that's not about your scholarship whatsoever, and you just thought it would be fun. So, like, I have a couple of these. I teach classical rhetoric to my graduate students. And so I did publish in the Harvard Center for Hellenic Studies journal about flute girls in ancient Greece. And that was just because I had been to a seminar, I learned about it, I thought it was really cool, and I was like, I wonder if I could publish anything in classics just to see if I could. Like it was even like a challenge project. So, do I publish in that area regularly? No, I think I have two classics kind of themed pieces out of all the publications I've ever done, but that's okay, right? Like that was something, it was related to what I was doing with my students. We had like a little website, about some of the teaching things we do with classical rhetoric at Finley. And I was like, you know what? That would be really fun to do. So that is one that I did after my second sabbatical. I kind of worked with that. I did a research stint at the Harvard Center just because it was fun. I was teaching the content, but nobody was asking me to do this kind of work. I just said, I just want to try it one time, and I did. And then I went back to what, the other things I'm working on. So it's okay to do that. Another thing to think about would be short projects. If you cannot get your brain around a scholarly article or it makes you want to cry because that sounds really long, you're not ready for that. So it could be that you need to dip back into something shorter, and there's a couple ways to do this. So one of the things that I ended up doing because I was so excited about faculty writing, and because I had not gotten to do anything with it really until I got to around 2017, as soon as I did, I ended up writing shorter pieces of ideas that were kind of coming so fast that I couldn't put them in a book, where I would write for Inside Higher Ed regularly. So these are just a couple of them, but there's a whole bunch in there just about things that I want to know that maybe you want to know. So one of them, for example, this 10 ways to make sure your writing happens. I wanted to make an article about what happens when you have a day to write and you have to get a lot done. How do you do that? So I just made a piece about that. And this one about what do professors do during a writing session. This is sort of unblocking the mystery. What are your colleagues doing when they go behind their office door? But, you can check these all out. These are actually really helpful for what we're talking about, but they were just short pieces. I knew, I don't have to have a peer-reviewed thing per se, but it does count as some scholarly activity. But you could also look in journals. Many journals now do have shorter sections. Sometimes they call them like short contributions. Sometimes they're opinion areas. Of course, it depends on what you're planning to do. If you're at associate rank and heading towards full, you might want to think about like what's impact there and peer review and all that. But these are also options just to get writing again. But also, one of the things I had to prove for full professor, if you're not there yet, is I had to prove like impact on my discipline and becoming more of a leader in the field and all that. And so some of these things got me there because they were more themed type pieces or pieces where I could kind of shed some light on the discipline. So short writing projects are great. And for the record, inside higher ed, anybody could write for them. It doesn't have to be on writing stuff. It could be on your teaching, it could be on a strategy, any observation about the university. They're really accessible and they're pretty easy to pitch. So if that's something that you're interested in, that's one that anybody can do. And you might even look in your own discipline. There are some organizations that might allow, like, say, a newsletter in your discipline. And it's not that you have to do these all the time, but if you just need to get those writing muscles going again, these can be really good options for that. Here's the last strategy. You may be ready for a new line of scholarly inquiry. And I totally was. So before I had tenure, my old line, like my early publications, are all on multimodal rhetoric and all that. And my dissertation was on digital rhetoric and feminism and adolescent girls. And I worked on that for a while. I did. But I don't know, a couple of years in, post dissertation, I was already starting to get bored. I really was kind of like, I might do one more. I kept saying I'll do one more thing because I need it for tenure. I need one more thing. I'll do it for tenure. But I knew that that really was was something I didn't want. I didn't know that I wanted to do a book on faculty writing interviews. I didn't know that yet. I had read those interviews, but I didn't, or the ones that were the inspiration, but I didn't know that yet because obviously ideas have to percolate. We got long careers. So that's something that happened. During administration, I switched gears completely and only wrote about administrative work. I published in journals about administration. I was the director of writing, so I published everything in the writing program, WPA journal, about things I was doing because I had no time. So I was doing, learning about electronic portfolios. I know that sounds very old school now, but at the time we were transitioning our program from paper to electronic portfolios. I wrote a lot about that, tons of admin content. I didn't love it, but I didn't have any time for anything else. And so, one thing you might consider if you are very buried in admin, you might find writing about it interesting. You might actually think, well, I know my way around being the director of such and such. Like that could be your area. You could totally go in that direction. That was during a 6-year stint. And off and on, I mentioned classical rhetoric. So I've done two things there. So I did one kind of early in my career, and I did the one on Flute Girls kind of in the middle of the career. But my newer area, once I kind of had the space to do that dream project, was faculty writing studies. And since that point, that's everything. That's everything I'm writing. All these inside higher ed pieces, there's some books, now 3 books on it. There's book chapters on it. That's where I'm at. Like, that's what I want to work on. And I made a hard jump, and I've made a hard jump twice. So sometimes you have to keep thinking about a research agenda, for tenure, making sure that you have like coherence and stuff like that. But you can start moving over to something else you want to do if you're bored with your method, your content, your projects, whatever, because you might be bored. You might honestly be bored. And so I mentioned the conference, like your standard scholarly conference you go to every year. That was one clear sign to me that I was bored, that I needed to move on to something else. Because I was like, I really hate I'm paying this registration fee. And I went to sessions, and none of the sessions really were about things I cared about. And I just kind of, plodded along and talked to people. But when you go have some of these unsatisfying academic experiences, it could be a sign that you're ready for a new line of inquiry. So just because you can publish yet another article on that topic doesn't mean you should, because it just makes writing harder when you just don't want to do it. And so for the same reason for post-tenure people, I usually say only do collaboration if you really want to. Like, you love the person and you think you'd really get good energy together, or you really do want to do it, but this is not the time to take on like those obligation projects. And this is kind of a hard thing when we have graduate students that we often mentor. We want to bring them along with us. This could be something, maybe, if you're going to do something with a grad student, pick it in a new line of inquiry that you want to do, not that they want to do, or find some kind of a compromise. But it's worth a look at that, because you can keep a couple of lines of research going. So I could keep doing some classical rhetoric. I could keep doing some faculty writing studies. Potentially, I could dip back into some admin content. I probably won't, but I could. So, it's kind of, there's a lot of things to think about, but you might be ready. So it's just worth a question, because usually you don't get asked that question as a post-tenure person. Like, is this really what you want to do right now? It might not be. And, so, for a lot of reasons, it could be you need a new conference, or you need to start reading a new journal, or, follow a new group. The other thing I would think about is impact, because some of us, a lot of academics have egos. We all have egos. We like our stuff to be read. But I would also think about impact in terms of, what do you really want your legacy to be? And so there's a couple ways that you can do this. My favorite one, and I actually wrote about this for Inside Higher Ed, I love that University of Michigan has a research impact challenge. I will send the link to Nancy, but it's just a step-by-step thing that you can follow and do. Like, go get an ORCID ID. If you didn't do that, do this other thing. If you didn't do that, and it's very 10 steps. That would be a great May project, to just say, hey, before I start putting the goods out in the world, have I really done all the things to make sure my research will be found? But then the other thing is, if you're not a big LinkedIn person, or you're not on there regularly, this is a spot where academics are kind of talking about their research and sharing it in a way. They try not to do it in an obnoxious way, but this is the way where we learn about stuff. So it's not just to publish your things, but actually to get it out there in the world. You are more senior, so you're able now to, it's not awkward. You can send an email to somebody in your same area and say, hey, I know we both work in faculty writing studies. I just put this thing out. I would love to hear what you're working on. I do that all the time because that's where I hear about stuff. So also that kind of stokes your creative juices because sometimes people will say, well, would you have time for a coffee over Zoom or something like that? And that could help. But that's small impact. But even like these bigger impact things, they're all parts of the same piece. If you're going to write and publish post tenure, impact has to be part of that conversation. And then finally, as we close, I do have a fun little like writing and publishing post tenure guide. I gave it to Nancy. She will share it with you, but it's a little assessment tool. It's just a front and a back where you just answer some honest questions. You look at your CV and you just decide like, what's happening right now? Like, are there obstacles in my writing? Do I not like my subject anymore? Like, it's just things like that. Because it could be you're still so much in love with your subject and you're annoyed that you haven't had time to get to things. So that's totally fine. It doesn't mean you have to make like a giant, declaration that you're leaving your discipline or anything like that. It doesn't mean that. But it's just a quick assessment of like where you are right now. Our bodies are older, we know more. You may not want to sit in the chair for as many hours a day to write. Like that might not be a thing for you. So you want to think about how writing would look like. So yes, I would encourage doing that tool. I can take any questions. I know a lot of people are watching the recording because we're doing this during around, end of semester time, but anybody can email me with questions at Christine@defendpublishlead.com. So that's our way that you can get your question to me. I answer all questions. So my office manager always makes sure that I see them all. If I don't, but please feel free to ask me questions. Also, you can, if you want, meet with me for 30 minutes for free since you're doing this webinar. Anybody can talk with me. No strings attached. Just email me and say, hey, can I set up a meeting with you for 30 minutes? That might be better than an email because you want to talk live and get some stuff back and forth. And then finally, I mentioned you can make a summer writing plan with us again for free. It's just a free webinar we do. We also record them and you can, if you register, you get the recording and all the tools. That is on Monday, May 4th at noon Eastern, which I think is 11 a.m. your time. But that's something that I think if you're just trying to get some writing done in the summer, we're going all for practicality there. So we're going to untangle a couple things about summer and just say, let's figure out what are you doing? Like let us literally make a little list here, figure out how you're going to do it, and at least you have a plan going forward that you're not just trying to guess on your own. All right. Thank you, everybody.